Welcome to the Scottsdale Top Docs podcast, where we share a mission to improve access to care and prevention, as well as for planning for the future. Our goal is to help people live healthier, happier, more informed lives. We believe healthcare isn't a job, but a calling to serve, and that the best care begins with conversation. Now on to today's episode.
Hello and welcome to today's special episode of the Scottsdale Top Docs podcast. I'm here with Dr. Connie Mariano. She actually owns the Center for Executive Medicine, was the first military female to be physician at the White House. She was also the first Filipino American to be Navy Admiral. She's beyond an impressive female, but she's also a role model in our community of medicine. She's a role model in our local community here in Arizona, and she strives to be a leader amongst women, not just because of her gender, but really because of her background. Obviously, I admire this woman who's sitting across from me, and I wanted to bring her on today to talk about the nature of the topic of the day, which is really the political environment that's going on. Now, Scottsdale Top Docs is not a political podcast, so this is not meant to influence, sway one way or another over anyone's desire to participate in a side. This is really to talk about the things that are really important to speak about today. Right now, in the environment of two candidates running, we have President Donald Trump and President Joe Biden running in a campaign against each other. And we just wrapped up with a debate. Today's July 12th. And so in the spotlight was a performance leaving the entire nation wanting answers about if someone was capable of doing a job. And who better to ask than the authority who worked in the White House and has had 4 successors since? Right. So Dr. Mariano worked through 3 administrations: Bush, the entire Clinton administration, and then part of Bush W's administration, correct? Correct. All right, so 9 years serving in the White House. After that, she went to Mayo and worked at their medallion program, working with concierge patients, including executives, famous actors and actresses, politicians of every sort. She's brilliant. People want to see her because she is a trusted authority, not just in medicine, but in our nation's community and history. When you hear her speak, she doesn't just speak about what medicine is right now. She speaks about what medicine has been in history, amongst presidents, amongst the public, and what is kept private. She also just released on her own episode yesterday, if you want to hear a little bit more about her personal opinion on some of this, Voice America House Calls, which is her podcast by Dr. Connie Mariano. So you can always check that out as well. Dr. Mariano, thank you so much for coming on today.
Well, thanks, Amber. It's an honor and delight to be on your show.
Thank you. So let's get into it a little bit. When we are talking about professional duty as a White House physician, what is most important?
That is the toughest job of all, because I look back, and it's been over 20 years since I left the White House. I had the honor and privilege of serving at the end of George Herbert Walker Bush's administration. I was there for the entire Clinton presidency, and then for W. Bush for about 6 months when I transitioned him to my successor, Richard Tubb, who thereupon other doctors have followed in that path. But I look back, and my heart breaks for what's going on now. I look at the last 8 to 10 years, and we have become so polarized as a country, so divided in terms of opinion. And you look at politics, and all my years of being in politics and as an observer, taking care of the president, but also being in that center of the storm, so to speak, you make a lot of observations about life and people. And it's very wrought with emotion. There's a lot of emotion. And my job as a physician, and as you as a healthcare provider, how do you strip away the emotion and focus on the facts and the data and the history to make a rational decision about selection for our country, right? How do you make the best choice? So what the latest in the news has been going on is revealing what's going on with the first patient, the president. We are seeing through the media very worrisome findings,
yes,
right? If
correct.
You did telemedicine and you're observing this person, there are things that make you wonder what's going on. And we can't, I can't diagnose him. I can suspect certain things, but everyone's going to head anyway. But all you can rely upon is what his doctor says. His doctor knows him. The current doctor has been with him for many years. He's a close friend of the family. They go way back, close personal relationship with them. And having been a White House doctor, my closest president that I worked with for over 8 years was Bill Clinton. And you're in that very unique inner circle. You know them, their family, their wife. You know what goes on. You see them on a daily basis. You know them more than your family.
Yes.
And so it goes back to the relationship. But even though you have that relationship to your patient, which is very unusual. How many doctors are out there, follow your patients, you live in their home, you work in their home, you go upstairs to their bedroom, you talk to them and their wife, you travel with them overseas. That is very rare, right? You can actually watch them be non-compliant with your recommendations. They shouldn't be
real time.
In real time. And so you become a lot of ways extension of the family. How does that bias what you do? And there's some beautiful there's well-written books. When Illness Strikes the Leader, I will always remember reading that book by Jerry Post and Bob Robbins from GW about the dilemma of the captive king. Because this is not the first time in history where there's been a disconnect from what we see in our leaders' behavior from what their people are telling us about them, right? But there's something wrong that we say, this is not quite right, but yet we have emotions. Some people, don't like the other guy, they like this guy, but yet we're going to let that go, and we're going to, it's confusing. So how do you bring order and rationality to a decision everyone makes? And it really comes down to this: who's running the country and who do I vote for, right? And so as a White House doctor, going back to what the job is, the role of the White House doctor is obviously to take care of your patient. Take care of your patient, be a good doctor. It's the things that I do as a doctor for my patients, things that you do for your clients and your patients. How do I provide the best possible care? How do I get people to help me? How do I get specialists when it's outside of my scope of practice? But the other obligation you have when you sit in that special position, physician of the president, which is a special title, not just White House doctor, you're physician to the president. How do you know you're the physician to the president? You're the one in charge. You're the one that history blames. You're the one that Capitol Hill subpoenas to come before them and testify under oath. And that's the part I tell any White House doctor: never perjure yourself. You can be loyal to your patient and his family. Great, I understand that, your devotion, but never perjure yourself, because your reputation, doctor, is on the line.
For history to see.
For history. You will go down in history with a list of doctors, that legacy we inherited as White House doctors, of being infamous, of not only cover up, you're caring for, but you're also covering up. And that's not what we believe in as good doctors. You don't cover up, because it's denial. It's not facing the fact. But what is our obligation as White House doctor? Obviously our patient, but your dual responsibility is the United States, your country. And the metaphor I use, a lot of times the analogy I use, if I were a flight surgeon, a lot of these White House doctors were former flight surgeons in the military. The incumbent physician was a flight surgeon. So the thing is, doc, are you going to clear this pilot to fly, right? Now, obviously, this candidate for the office of re-election is not a pilot. He's not going to fly. But really, does he have the ability? If he were a pilot, would you clear him? Does he have the ability to run a company? If you're running a Fortune 500 company, can you let him drive? Will you let him drive? Of course they don't drive. They have the limousine. They have all that. But can he do the duties of his office? And if you really feel, as a clinician, I don't think he can do even activities of daily living, ADLs, let alone make major executive decisions, then you're in that dilemma, right? You're loyal to your patient. You love the patient. You love the family. And you don't want to lose your job either, because, if you say my guy can't be here, bye-bye, you're out of a job, right?
Correct.
That's your end. But what about this country? The fact that in your heart, can you sleep at night? Can you sleep at night knowing that if there are incoming missiles to this country and the White House operator calls the second floor residents
at 1 a.m.,
talks to them, and I'd receive calls like that, and you get the call and they say, doctor, this is the White House operator, and we have a special drop line in our homes that are placed for White House doctors. It's a secure line that nobody can hack into. And when that phone rings in the morning, or in the middle of the night, your heart races. And the first phone, you hear it says, Doctor, White House operator, stand by for the president or stand by for the first lady. And you're just like, it's true. I've gotten those calls.
What am I about to hear?
And then, so who wakes him up? How does he make the decision? And who has the nuclear codes? The mill aide who is on call in the White House at night, along with the medical staff who's on call at night, usually in the bomb shelter in the basement. They're there. I instituted 24-hour coverage of the president under Bill Clinton. They didn't have 24-hour call. And at the end of George Herbert Walker Bush, everybody would go home at night unless you were overseas. And I said, why isn't anybody in the middle of the White House, if the president falls down in the middle of the night? And my predecessor said, well, they can just, throw him in the limo and take him to GW. And I said, well, what if he stops breathing? It's like, no, don't worry about that. So when I became head of the medical unit under Bill Clinton in 1993, I said, we will institute from this day forward, until it's rescinded in writing, that the White House medical unit will provide 24/7 coverage to the president. And then that was added to the vice president. So wherever the president goes, there is a medical personnel, ideally a doctor, commonly on the big trips, his doc. His doc is in the background. He's not right beside him in the kill zone. So going back, to the responsibilities of the White House doctor, yes, you have an obligation to your patient, but what is your obligation to alert the American public? And there's a way to do that. And I outlined it in my podcast, and it deals with the 25th Amendment.
So I want to do two things here, not three. One, discuss the 25th Amendment. Two, your role as a healthcare provider is important to the patient. You just discussed that in depth. But your role as a military personnel in the White House, does your role as military personnel in the White House, and not even just personnel, leadership in military, does that change your duty to report something that you've seen? And who do you report that to if you know there is an issue?
Those are all great questions. 25th Amendment was ratified in 1967. It was initiated in 1965. And really after President Kennedy was assassinated. And it was really who's in charge. And it's an orderly manner. There are 4 sections of it. I won't bore you with that. But Section 3 and 4, it applies to the president and the vice president. If that person dies in office, it's a no-brainer. It's the vice president. If they're lost or for some reason Air Force One is missing, in the movie Air Force One, there was a scenario where they cannot reach the president, so thereby the duties of office fall upon the vice president. They do not become president. They assume the duties until it's proven that the president's gone forever. Then they become the acting president and sworn in as president. But there is an orderly way to do it. And actually, before every administration, I don't know if it's changed since I left, there is a meeting with the president's physician, as well as the military aide, as well as the Office of Presidential Emergency Operations, PEOC, the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, that talks about the 25th Amendment, along with all the military aides, to talk about what you keep in the football and the orderly fashion in the event that the president is assassinated, is in an ICU, is incapacitated, though it's scenario-based. That's a lot of the work we did. Under the Clinton administration, I did work with the Carter administration, the Carter Center on that, Fordham Law School. There's a lot of work that was done years ago, which is sort of lost to the media. They don't know that. That's the academic side of the historical perspective of studying about what we do. So there is an orderly fashion of the 25th Amendment, but it's a very hard amendment to enact. The last time the 25th Amendment was enacted was by my successor, Dr. Richard Tubb, under W. Bush, and most people don't remember it, but when W. Bush underwent his colonoscopy for routine procedures at Camp David, they gave him an anesthetic, which incapacitated him for a couple hours, because you can't, they give you propofol or fentanyl to anesthetize you, sedate you to undergo the colonoscopy. And so they tell you, don't drive, don't sign any paperwork, don't make any major decisions. So when you're the President of the United States, we don't want you to make any major decisions. So who makes the decisions? Your vice president. So under the 3 to 4 hours when that happened, the vice president, Dick Cheney, was the acting president. It was all enacted, it was set up in paperwork, and Dr. Tubb did something very smart. What he did, he had an NIH neurologist did a baseline on George W. Bush. And let's say this is his baseline neurologic exam. Fine, great, I know what it is. Separate from Dr. Tubbs, separate from anybody else. He says, I, as a neurologist, going to do that. Then he underwent his colonoscopy. When he was in recovery, they brought the neurologist back. He examined and said, all right, he's clear.
So a baseline test,
Yeah.
then they have the procedure, then the same doctor comes in and does the same thing. And he's a outside of the box referral source,
right.
meaning he does not have personal outside of like, hi, I want to do a really great job at my job. He doesn't have the same stressors that the White House physician does.
Other people would do. So the White House doctor orchestrates. You're the one who selects the specialist. You're the one. But then from you, what happens with that data? Obviously, you brief your patient, you brief the wife, the first lady, that inner circle, and then do you issue a press statement? And after every physical, and I did many under Clinton, I did the last physical for George Herbert Walker Bush before he left office. I did all President Bill Clinton's physicals. I lined them up. We set that up. And at the end of the physicals I did under President Clinton, I sat down with him in the Medical Evaluation Treatment Unit, the Me Too suite, formerly at Bethesda. I said, these are the findings. This is what all the doctors say. This is what I would recommend we share with the public, right? And their press advance person was with us. Can we issue a statement? It comes from my office through the press secretary. I don't issue a statement. It's his press secretary. And the president says, okay, you can release that, right? Not too happy about my weight, but hey, you release it. I don't like that. So, but they release it. And what I did, when the president returned to the White House, I had another doc fly back with him on Marine One. He was aware of this. I said, I would like to do a press conference with all the doctors who examined you so the press can ask them directly, because I didn't do his prostate exam. I had the head of urology do it. I didn't do his, stress echo. The head of cardiology did it. I didn't do it. So what we did, we lined up all the docs on the stage at Bethesda Naval Hospital. We had the press pool there, and the press secretary was with me, and there are pictures of that in the old days. I would make a statement. I would read it. Press secretary was there. I would introduce one by one each of the doctors, what they did. And I said, what would you like to ask the doctors? Not me, them. No filter. You ask them direct.
Okay, so where does privacy of your patient, being the president, fall in relationship? Like, you made an action that was essentially approved. Are presidents allowed to withhold their information from the public? For how long? And in your podcast yesterday, you mentioned that there are records of presidents that cannot be found.
They're lost.
They're lost.
It's a tough dilemma because you want to respect people's confidence. And, people have always said for years, show me your records, right? When they go, well, release your records. What do you want, your pediatric? What are you talking about, records? If someone wants to hide something, there's no record. They're not going to release their records. And what are you looking for? I mean, I've been involved when I was at Mayo Clinic, and there were obviously other candidates running for office, and I met with Sanjay Gupta. We talked about this whole issue of release. It was actually John McCain. They wanted to release the records. Then they want a bunch of other doctors combing through records. What are you looking for? I mean, do you think they're going to put something in there that's harming? And they're going to remove it. They're not going to have it. You won't find the record. You won't find the record. So what do you rely on? You honestly have to rely upon the honesty and judgment of the person the president picks to be his personal physician.
So the public is relying on that?
That's all you can do. You cannot force them. You cannot force them to have a physical. You cannot force them. There's no legislation that forces them. And honestly, when you think of as an American public, do you really want to give that much power to a doctor? Beware. Do you want the doctors to pick your president? Do you really want them? It's really, how does the American public decide who to vote, right? It's your decision. Everyone gets one vote, hopefully one vote. And you have to decide based on the data, right? Based on the data. And you're looking at all the conflicting information. What's the probability this person will live long, think well? I mean, there's no special scanners, there's no special tests. And some people are willing to accept some things over the other. It depends on it's a very complicated decision. But when we look at healthcare, the question we ask the White House doctor, is this person in office fit to do the duties of his office, which I believe, this is how I define it. What is fitness for duty as a president? They can think, They can make a rational decision. You may not like the decision. You may disagree on a political basis, but they can make a decision and they can walk you through that. They have good judgment call. They have a good memory of things, and they can communicate it effectively, where people don't go. The common man or woman on the street goes, okay, buy that, instead of raising red flags, where more people are red flags. And they can portray a confidence in America. So how are you different? How is the first patient different for any other patients? Because he or she, one day, they're the President of the United States. We hired you to do this job. You represent us. So thereby, you have to work for us. You're on call 24/7. We rely upon you to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Now, this part, the military part, the incumbent physician is no longer a military officer. He's a retired Army colonel. Now, when I was there, came in as a captain, retired as an admiral. So as a military officer, you raise your hand. Your oath is to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We have that all written out. That is our oath. Your oath, obviously, you have an oath as a Hippocratic oath to your patient, but your other oath is to the United States of America. And that's the challenge.
You mean as, not as a healthcare provider, but as a military.
As an officer.
As an officer in the military.
Yes.
So you have duty to your patient as a doctor, but you have a duty to your country as a military officer. Mm-hmm. And do you feel that you are allowed to do that duty as a healthcare provider and as military personnel? Like, who do you report something that you have a problem with?
Yep.
When you personally have a problem, who are you as the White House physician responsible to report to? And what is their duty? Because you can say, I'd like to make a consultation for this. What if your patient refuses?
That's a great question. Over and over again.
Yeah.
What do you do?
It's again, when they're not military personnel, that is potentially, if they are not military personnel, they do not have the same duty. You would like to say that as patriots and nationals of our country that we do, that each of us does. But maybe their personal beliefs don't lend them to that. But who does the first physician report to if they have a concern? And do they have the right to make it public instead of reporting it up the chain if there is a chain?
Yeah, these are excellent questions. So who do you report? Who's your boss, okay? When you're in the military, as a military physician, I was a rear admiral, you know who signs your fitness report? You know who your boss is? The President of the United States. As a military officer, there are only very few people. The President signs your fitness report once a year. The people whose fitness reports are signed by the President are the physician, the President is if you're a military officer, and the military aides to the President. Those are the only people. Everybody else, you report to the White House military office on the 18 acres, right? There's a difference. But if you're a civilian, you still report to your patient, because if you have the title physician to the President, that is a political appointment to serve as a president. It's the equivalent of senior staff. I had titles of both. I had physician to President, which is a separate certificate signed by the President and the Secretary of State. So you're elevated to now you're one of the senior staff, equivalent to chief of staff. But you report to them. But then that's the conflict. You're sort of, you're conflicted. It's great when everything's in agreement, but it goes back to your relationship with your patient. And you sit down and you have that long-term relationship with your patient and you say, Mr. President, we got to have a serious talk here. This is what I like to do. I'm very worried. I'm very concerned. I know about what's happening in the media. You travel with the press pool. You see them every day. When you go to the Oval Office, you know where you walk through on the colonnade past the doctor's office? You walk past the press pool. They shout questions at you. You see them. You take care of the guys in there. Yeah, you take care of them. We take care of the press guy. I know the press guy. You take care of them. So, Mr. President, I am obligated to respond. They're going to, the press secretaries are getting hammered. I need to say something, and you're not going to like it. So what do you do? So I used to tell patients, what do you do if the president disagrees? I say you appeal to higher authority. You know who the higher authority is? The First Lady. The First Lady. You cannot do your job unless the First Lady approves of you, right? President chose you, but if the First Lady says, I don't like that, doctor, you're out. You're not going to be there, right? But if First Lady says, okay, I trust that doctor. you can take care of my president. Because I always say the First Lady's voice is the first voice he hears every morning and every night, right? That's the guiding light, because she has his back. Of anybody, that's the inner circle. That's the First Lady. And so if you're in that inner circle, if the president disagrees, you say, Mrs. President, you ask the First Lady, FLOTUS, First Lady of the United States, I got to tell you this, I really am very worried. This is what. And then they're going to say, well, honestly, what do you want to do? And I said, we need to come clean. I need to come clean as a doc. I need to, and this is, and if we're hiding something, you're out of a job, doctor. If you're saying that, because sooner or later you're going to get the subpoena. And one of the things I tell White House doctors, and including the current guy who I don't envy, never perjure yourself. Never ever perjure yourself. Right? Everything you say is on record. People go back. Yeah, they go back all the time. They have you saying one thing, and on the opposite screen they have you saying the other thing. Right? And they'll put it side by side. So no wonder the public doesn't trust the media, and they don't trust politicians, because the old joke in Washington, D.C., there's an old joke in Washington. How do you know if a politician's lying? Their lips are moving. Right. And it's really sad, right? Because they were meant to serve the American public. And it's very sad to serve the highest office that this has come to this. But going back to the role of White House doctor, obviously, your role is the patient, but you serve this country. And when you are asked by the American public, what's up with your patient? What's up with your patient? Can you be truthful with it? No.
Is it your obligation to be truthful to the press, or to protect the privacy of your patient as the president, as the first physician?
If it comes to the point that particular malady the president has can cause harm to the United States of America, that puts us in risk of being weak in terms of our national security, if we are jeopardized, right? If we find any president or future president has an alcohol issue, has a drug addiction that impairs their ability to do the job, then we have a problem. We have a problem.
So Arizona is not unfamiliar to this. We live in this state. We had an amazing senator. We all know that he was eventually diagnosed with brain cancer. And saying that out loud, you wonder at what point before he passed was any decline in function noted that could affect his role. Now, saying that, we are aware that had to have existed. Most people don't go from diagnosis to end of life without any impairment, functional, cognitive, system, body-wide. When organs are starting to fail, when processes are starting to decline, signs and symptoms are the first thing people note. They're not always pain, although that is the number one reason most people end up going to their doctor. But for people who are regularly seen by physicians and assessed by physicians, of course you should notice something before I do as the patient. Of course my family may notice something before I do as a patient. So, it's not like you haven't just seen it in the presidencies. You've seen it in every level of politics. So where do the American people go to get straight answers and to prevent any level of incompetence from happening in the future? Because this is the most important topic of the day. Not should so-and-so do what and what. We each have our individual duty to vote. We each have our individual duty to research what we want to see in the future of America and decide for ourselves. But how do we prevent a problem of inability to perform? In what capacity and to what degree? How do we prevent this from being even questioned in the future?
The only way is to be transparent, and that's almost impossible. Because people, when they run for office, they're not going to show you their bad side. They're going to show you your good side. Of course they do. They want you to. They want to win. And I understand that. But we are all human. If I were a reporter, if I were asking any of the there are actually several questions if I could ask the candidate. And I tell women this question. If you're dating somebody, you know what you ask them? What is it about you don't want me to know? You tell me that. And then if I were asking presidential candidate, the questions I have, is this. Tell me why don't tell me why I shouldn't vote for the other guy. You tell me why I should vote for you. Don't tell me, I don't want to hear about the other guy. And the third thing is, would you die for this country, Mr. President? Would you die for us? Because it really comes down, you're hiring them to do a job. It's to take care of our country, in the best interests of our country. What is their best interest for the American people? You're working for us. And everyone will have medical issues. That's why doctors and providers will always, you and I will always have a job. And the conflict is how much of it can remain private. Can you imagine a woman president where, what is your weight, Madam President? Is she going through menopause?
You seem moody today.
Do we declare the 25th Amendment if the Madam President is undergoing menopause? Do we do hormonal? You can think of all this, because we're human. We are mortal. And so we undergo injuries. We undergo the wear down of the body. Some people age better. Some people don't age so well. People develop things. The people on Capitol Hill have the office of the attending physician of Congress. It's military. It's usually an admiral, and there's a whole team of people who take care of those guys up there. And what is the solution, Dr. Connie? Term limits. If I were a queen, if I could dictate, I would say, if we can have term limits for all political positions, especially at the highest levels of government, you know how many years it would be? 6 years. 6 years, and you're done. Just like Switzerland, right? 6 years. You know why 6 years is the ideal number? When I've been with the president who served 2 terms, President Clinton, and the thing, observing presidents. The first 2 years a new president comes into office, they're figuring out how things happen. They just won the election. We want to get everything going, but how does this White House thing work, right? They're learning the job. First 2 years, right? The next 2 years of a 4-year term, you know what they're doing? They're running for re-election, okay? So forget the last 2 years. Then they win re-election, and then the final 2 years, okay, so they're done 4 years. Years 5 and 6 of their second term, you know what they're doing? Then they get stuff done. Then you can count on them. And the final 2 years of their 6-year term, if you could do that, of their 8-year term, the final 2 years, it's legacy. They're working on legacy. So when are your most productive time? Your last 2 years. So term limits, right? Nobody should be allowed to be a professional politician.
Yeah, clearly that's a great point, because at some point we either need to have a formal assessment redone. Everybody keeps talking about age limits. I have 98-year-old patients, 93. I have a 101-year-old patient who is incredibly sharp on most days.
Sure.
I have a 98-year-old patient who does not walk with a walker. Their age does not mean that you are incapable, but we do see decline of functions in age, especially for people who, essentially we say use it or lose it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, they're neurons.
There are plenty of things that we could point to, but at some point, things have to be challenged.
Yeah.
And this is a perfect turning point, I think, for the American people to ask what else will be done to ensure that responsible duty is being performed, is capable of being performed. I really appreciate your candor. I expected nothing less from you today. Of all of the things that I really wanted to ask you today, it is along the questions, really along the lines of, if you happen to be President Biden's physician right now, to be certain that he is fit for duty, what would you recommend? And what would you decide to make public?
Obviously I'm not his physician. I haven't seen him in many years. I met him many, many years ago under the Clinton administration. So it's over 20 years.
Even with the question coming
about. But even now, if I were in that horrible, unenvious position, I would say come clean. Because now the media is starting to suspect more and more. And I would say we need to come clean. I would say I need to speak to the press. I need to go out there because I'm getting subpoenaed, Mr. President. They're going to subpoena me on Capitol Hill, and I will have to testify under oath. Then I would say we need to bring in Dr. Kennard, the neurologist, to be interviewed. by the media, because that's how you feed the media. And the American public, they want to know, come clean now, come clean. It isn't about the other guy. The other guy, it'll be handled in their own way. But it's really about you and your judgment and your honesty. How do you know a good president or not? I mean, you look at their judgment. Who do you hire to be on your cabinet? Who do you pick to be your doctor? And why do you pick them for that reason? But it's all about people being clean and honest. It's about honesty.
We are so lucky that we are not in that position, right?
I wouldn't want that job again.
Absolutely, so much pressure. And like you mentioned, I think he's in such a unique position because you cannot be in that position without becoming friends with the family. You want to be a caring physician. We want to care about people at every stage of life and end of life, every single stage. And you can't do that being so removed and so robotic. But also, there's no way for you not to be human when you care. There's no way.
The relationship with the White House doctor and your first patient is that of loyalty. You're their doc. You're the family doc. The incumbent president, his doctor took care of his dying mother, took care of his dying son. They go back to 2009. Richard Tubb, my successor, hired the current doctor. So way back. So you really go back so much. You have that special relationship. And in that relationship is the loyalty. So in order for a doc to do that, it's almost like you betray them. You betray them. But you have an obligation, you love your patient, but you also have to love this country more. What do you value about being an American and being in our country? It isn't about winning anymore. It's about doing the right thing. And that's the very tough job, is doing the right thing in this situation. Every candidate will have some malady or something they don't want to know, because everyone has a right to privacy that they don't want because the question is, how does this have to do with me to govern, right? If you get a woman president who had an abnormal pap smear, who cares? Unless she has endometrial cancer or uterine cancer. I mean, you can extrapolate all you want. How does this impact my ability to do my job? And then we get inquiry regarding, is there a concern here about their ability? You have to respond. You don't deceive, deflect, deny, make things up. You have to be honest. So if you don't feed the media beast who's wondering, then they're going to keep going at you until they get what they want.
Or they create their own narrative with the things that he's saying. I mean,
they're going to.
Last night I heard a slew of things, not just the direct public statements that the president made, but also, I don't want to start any meetings after 8 p.m. I want a lighter schedule. Yeah. These are things that we could consider for someone who might be cognitively overwhelmed. So it's really hard for the public to discern based on what the media is feeding. And you're really looking for someone to give you the best information. And you always want to look to the best source. Right. And what better source than the physicians who see the president? Hopefully this inspires some amount of more conversation, change, even precedent for the future, to make sure that the rights, safety, freedoms of American citizens can be maintained and as strong as they've ever been, because that's what we need a leader of our country to do. So thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. I can't wait for you to see this episode. So thank you.
Thanks, Amber. And thanks. And I wanted you to know I've been asked by all the major media networks to interview, and I've declined. I don't respond. And for you, I trust you. I know you're not going to slant the narrative to a particular side, and just have an open and honest conversation is what we do. But we also want the American public to know what's an open, honest conversation that is not a paid political announcement.
Yes.
We want to get away from that.
Thank you so much. I could not be more grateful.
Thank you.
That has been today's episode of the Scottsdale Top Docs podcast. Please tune in next time. I have goosebumps. It went so well.
You should be a